Right. Good morning to everyone. My name is Hendrik Makaneta, and today we are going to have a lesson on mathematics, grade 9. And of course, this is our first lesson today after a short break. We are going to learn about algebraic expressions and of course equations together with examples, and where we will be able to solve for different variables. And of course, you'll remember that algebra is made up of numbers and variables. And that is why we will have to solve for x at some point in order to get the solution to complex algebraic expressions, which are in the form of equations. And we will go through some examples, and thereafter you will also get an opportunity to reflect and to solve some of the variables. Now, we should know at this point that it is very important that when you solve equations, you can do this either by inspection, meaning that you can also just check if, for instance, you have an example of x plus 2 is equal to 4. You can tell that the number that you need to add to 2 in order to get 4 is 2. So that is solving the equation by inspection. But at the same time, you can also use the additive or multiplicative inverses. In other words, you can get rid of the coefficients or any other term so that you can be left with your variable on the left-hand side. And in my view, it doesn't matter whether it's the left-hand side or the right-hand side. The most important thing is to know how to find the variable. So even if it's on the right-hand side, you can still apply the same principles of additive as well as multiplicative inverses. What is very important, again, is to realize the importance of solving equations by inspection. Some of the equations may be easier, so you may be able to solve them by inspection, whereas others may be a little bit complex. And in complex situations, then you can be able to use the additive or multiplicative inverse. Now, if you look at the equation that we have in our midst here, x plus 3, you can see that we have solved x plus 3 by taking 3 from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. That is what we call the additive inverse, because when 3 is on the left-hand side, it is positive. And you can tell that once you transpose it to the right-hand side, it will now change the sign. That is the additive inverse that I was talking about. The additive inverse of positive 3 is negative 3. And of course, vice versa. The additive inverse of negative 3 is positive 3. So there are two ways, like I've just said, of solving equations. The first way is that you can solve it by inspection, and the second one is that you can use the additive inverse. In this case, we need to use the additive inverse because you are adding x and 3. So you can tell that once you take 3 from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, you can see already that the positive 3 there has changed the sign. It is no longer positive, but negative 3. And of course, 7 minus 3 will give us 4. That is how you solve your for x in this instance. Alternatively, you can also do this by inspection. I'm sure that you can agree with me that x plus 3 on the left-hand side is equal to 7, which is on the right-hand side. So you can tell that the missing number there should be 4, just by inspection. you can tell that 4 plus 3 will give you 7. So those are the two ways in which you can solve your equations. And I hope that this lesson will go a long way to help you when you have to solve for any variable, be it X, Y, or Z, or A, B, or C. Any other variable, there are two ways of solving. For X or for any variable, the first one is that you can do that by inspection. And then the second one is that you can just use any additive or multiplicative inverse, because there will be instances where you need to use multiplicative inverse. Now, this was the first or the very first example that we had to look at in as far as this topic of equations is concerned. I hope that you understand how we have calculated X. Let me also indicate that, in mathematics, we always say that there are many ways to solve a problem. So if you have a different way, please don't hesitate to share it with us, and let's look at your method as well. So you don't necessarily have to rely on one method or two methods only. If you feel very strongly that there's another method that you can use, please feel free at any time to share the method with us for the general well-being of all the learners. So we are now going to proceed to the next example. This was just our first example. And of course, the second example, as you can see there, we have 4x minus 8 is equal to 12. And then again, you can use the additive inverse if you can. And of course, you can see that 4 multiplied by x minus 8 is equal to 12. So the right-hand side is 12. So all that you need to do really is to find a number. If you can multiply a number by 4 and subtract 8 from the product, then you should be able to get 12. And we can see just by inspection there that if you multiply 4 by 5, if you multiply 4 by 5, you get 20, and 20 minus 8 gives you 12. So 8 subtracted from 20 will give you 12. So meaning that x value there has to be 5 if you have to solve it by inspection. But then again, the other method, because this might be complicated to one learner, but it may be easier to another learner. So depending on the levels of complication of the problem, I suggest that if you feel that the challenge is complicated, please use the additive inverse approach. So we are now going to use the additive inverse approach. You can see the first step there. What we do is that we realize that we have negative 8 in the left-hand side, and the additive inverse of negative 8 is positive 8. So it means negative 8 plus 8 will give you 0. Now, whatever you do in the left-hand side must also be done in the right-hand side. So the additive inverse of 8 there, of negative 8 rather, it's positive 8. That is why you have 12 plus 8, excuse me. That is why you have 12 plus 8 in the right-hand side. Where does the positive 8 come from? That is the additive inverse of negative 8. And now you can see that once you add them together, 12 and 8 added together will give you 20. Now the right-hand side, you have 20, and the left-hand side, you have 4x. Now, 4 is what we have called a coefficient. You'll remember in the previous lessons that you have gained probably in the previous grade, in grade 8, you taught about the coefficient. So coefficient of x is 4. And how do you get rid of the coefficient of 4? then you can apply the multiplicative inverse. And what is the multiplicative inverse of 4? It will be 1 over 4. So in other words, you have to divide both sides by 4. So if you divide 4x by 4, you will be left with x. And of course, if you divide 20 by 4, you will get a 5. In other words, x will be equal to 5. That will be the value of x. So the value of x in this case will be 5. So x is equal to 5. And of course, that is how you solve the equation. Two ways that I've already spoken about. The first one, you can solve for x by inspection, meaning that you have to look at the value that has to be multiplied by 4. And then once you subtract 8, you should be able to get 12. And we could see just by inspection that that value will be 5, because 4 times 5 is 20. And 20 minus 8 gives you 12. Therefore, x is equal to 5, just by inspection. Alternatively, you can use the additive inverse together with the multiplicative inverse in this case. The additive inverse of -8, and thereafter you have to apply the multiplicative inverse. And the multiplicative inverse of 4, it's 1 over 4. So you divide 20 there by 4. And of course, 20 divided by 4 will give you 5. So the final answer there will be x is equal to 5. And of course, that will be the value of x. And if you want to test it again, you can do so. You can go back to the equation and substitute the value of 5 there, and you'll see that 4 times 5 is 20. 20 minus 8 is 12. So it's very important, if you are not sure, just to check your answer at the end of your problem, just to test and check whether your answer is correct. Right, let's carry on to the next one, of course, which will be the third example. And in this case, we need to solve now for the value of x. So you can see that we now have a little bit, we now have a bracket. You've got 3 open bracket, 10x minus 5, and then you close your bracket. And this is equal to 45. How would you solve for x in this case? I've already taught you that there are 2 ways of solving for x. You can either use the inspection. Just by inspection, you can look at the value of x that is suitable. Alternatively, you can use the additive inverse or the multiplicative inverse in this instance. So I want us to use this equation now to solve for x. So the equation is as follows. We have 3 open bracket, 10x minus 5, and then you close your bracket, and this is equal to 45. So what is the value of x in this instance? How are you going to find the value of x? So please feel free at any time if you want to raise your hands, and if you want to say anything, or ask a question, please feel free at any time to ask. So the key question now is, how are we going to solve for x in this instance? Bugs, let me give you an opportunity to come in and just tell us what is the first step that you are going to do? Are you going to solve this by inspection, or are you going to use the additive and multiplicative inverses in this instance? Please think about it. If you have a pen and a paper, I hope everyone does. Please start working it out, because I'm just going to do it together with you now. I want you to follow the steps that we are going to use in this instance. Right. So the first things first, if you can look at this tray here, you can tell that the tray is multiplied with the binomial. Remember, we have got the binomial, which is 10x minus 5. So once you multiply this binomial with a tray, you get 45. So in other words, you can start by using, if you want, you can break the bracket, it's fine. Alternatively, you can just, divide everything there by 3. So I've used 2 methods. In fact, I've used one of the 2 methods. In my case, I've just made 3 to have its own multiplicative inverse. And what is the multiplicative inverse of 3? Yes, Nosipo? The multiplicative inverse of 3. I hope that Nosipo will come in now. The multiplicative inverse of 3 is 1 over 3, or a third rather. So I'm just going to allow for questions. I see Nosipo's hand is up. Nosipo, please go ahead.
Hi, sir.
Hi, Nosipo.
Sir, are you taking questions, or should I just get to the answer? Because I wanted to answer this question.
It's fine. You can answer in any way. It's fine.
Oh, okay, sir. So this is how I wrote it. I said the 3 outside the bracket times, okay, because we take whatever that's outside and multiply with whatever that's inside the bracket, right?
Okay.
And then I said 3 times 10, and then it gave me 30x.
Okay.
And then I took the 3 again and I multiplied it with the 5. It gave me 15.
Okay.
And then my equation was 30x minus 15 equals to 45.
Okay. And the final answer?
And then, sorry?
Okay, go ahead.
And then I took the 15 to the other side, and then I got 30x equals to 45 plus 15.
Okay.
And
so
then,
you say your final answer?
And then say I divided I added that and it gave me a 60, then took the 30 and divided it with the 60, and I got 2. So x is equal to 2.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. So what you say your final answer is, before I let you go?
My final answer is 2, sir.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much indeed, Nosipo, for taking the time and the trouble to answer this question. And of course, as you can tell, what we have done here was just to indicate that in my case, I just used the multiplicative inverse. And in this case, the multiplicative inverse of 3 is 1 over 3, so it's a third. So in other words, you multiply the left-hand side by a third, you do the same with the right-hand side. So in other words, 45, when you divide 45 by 3, you get 15. And of course, when you divide 3 by 3, you get 1. That is why the 10x minus 5 is now outside of the bracket. So that is how I have broken the bracket. By the way, this is not the only way. There are other ways as well, or there are other methods that can be followed in this instance. But in my case, I've just used the multiplicative inverse of 3, which is a third. And now the left-hand side is 10x minus 5, and the right-hand side is 15. Now, from this point, at this point, you can see that the next step that I followed was to use the additive inverse of -5. Remember, the whole point is to be left with only x, which is the variable. So we want to get rid of all the numbers and so we can be left with x. But there's a way of getting rid of these numbers. You don't just remove them. You use the additive inverse in the case of -5, and in the case of 10, you will have to use the multiplicative inverse. Now, what is the additive inverse of -5 rather? That is +5. So you can see now that once we take out the -5 from the left-hand side there, it will change the sign. It will become positive in the right-hand side. So in the left-hand side, the 5 was negative, and in the right-hand side, it is now positive. That is what we call the additive inverse. You can see since this lesson started, I've already emphasized this additive inverse. It's very important that you look at the sign. So if the sign is negative in the left-hand side, once it goes to the right-hand side, or once you transpose the number to the right-hand side, the sign will change. It will now be positive. But if the sign is positive in the left-hand side, when you transpose it to the right-hand side, it will change the sign. It will now be negative, and vice versa. So now at this point, 15 plus 5 gives us 20. Now 10x is equal to 20. Now the next step will be to now apply the multiplicative inverse of 10, which is 1/10, or a 10th. So in other words, you divide both sides by 10. If you divide 10x by 10, you will be left with x. And if you divide 20 by 10, you get 2. So x will be equal to 2. And this is how you solve this equation. And I hope that there is no confusion. By the way, you can still solve it by inspection, by looking at the number. I mean, if you look at your binomial inside here, 10x minus 5, if you multiply this by 3, you just have to ask yourself what number can be multiplied by 3 in order to get 45. So you know that 15 is the number. If you multiply 15 by 3, you get 45. But now you have 10x here. You have 10x minus 5. So obviously, the value of x should be 2, because 2 times 10 is 20, and 20 minus 5 is 15. So the value of x, just by inspection, should be 2. Alternatively, once you have solved your equation, you can test your value. You can test your answer, whether your answer is correct. So in other words, you'll put 2 where there is x, and 10 times 2 is 20. 20 minus 5 is 15, and 15 times 3 is 45. So you can tell that 2 is the correct answer, because if you test it, it will balance the equation. The left-hand side will be equal to the right-hand side. And that is how you solve this equation. You must not hesitate to stop me if there is a question from your side, so that we can just answer at any time. If you feel that you have a question, please feel free at any time to raise a hand as we proceed. Thank you once again, Nosipo, for answering the first one. Now we are proceeding to a few activities now. If you can look at these activities, I've got 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1, and 1.4. So we have about 4 activities. This is just one question there, question 1, which consists of about 4 sub-questions. And what is the question? Solve for x in these equations. We need to solve for x. How are you going to solve for x in this instance? 1.1, you can write it down if you have a pen and a paper with you. 2x plus 3 is equal to 5x plus 3. I want us to be able to solve it together. If you can, please do it on your side as well. And let's check whether we are on the same page. And the second one, 5x plus 3 is equal to 9 minus x, followed by 2x plus 3 is equal to x plus 4. Unkabetsi, I see your hand. I'm just going to let you in now. And then the last one is 10x minus 7 is equal to 5x plus 3. So we have about 2 participants whose hands are up. Unkabetsi is one of them. Unkabetsi, please go ahead. I hope you want to talk about the first one. Please go ahead, Unkabetsi. All right, let me see if I can. I'm sure you are muted. Let me unmute you. All right, I'll just allow you to also be able to unmute yourself. Yes, Unkabetsi.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Sir, I said, morning, sir. I put the like terms together, then I said 5x minus 2x is equal to 3 plus 3. Then the 5x minus 2x gave me, the 5x minus 2x gave me 3x, and then 3 plus 3 was 6. Then I said 3x divided by 3 and 6 divided by 3. And then from the 3 divided by 3, x was left. And then from 6 divided by 3, 2 was left. So x is equal to 2.
Okay, so your value of x is 2.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I will hold it right there. Hold it right there. So your value of x is 2. Thank you very much. Let's go to you, Yoli. So I'm not saying that is the correct answer. Just keep on. Let's hear Yoli first. I'm going to.
Morning, sir.
Yes, Yoli.
Sir, I got the same answer as Onkabetsi.
Oh, you got the same answer?
Yes, sir.
So your x is 2.
Yes. No,
Okay.
wait. Sir, can I just explain? On
Yes,
the first one, on the left side, 2x plus 3, it's 5. It's 2, open bracket 5, close bracket plus 3, equals to 5, open bracket 2, close bracket plus 3.
Okay. And
yes,
tell
sir.
me, when you test your answer, does the equation balance? Oh, let's test it together then. Let's go to the left-hand side. You say your answer is, your x value is 2, right?
Yes.
Now let's test whether that is the correct answer.
Not
Let's go to the left-hand side. Are you still there, Yulisa?
2. Yes, sir, I'm here. 2.
So it will be 2
it's
times
not
2.
Here, no, sir. It's 2 times 5 on the left-hand side.
Okay. And the right-hand side?
It's 5 times 2.
Okay, so meaning that you have 2 different values now of x.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for, I hear what you're saying, but remember, there's only one value of x that you can have. So, there's only one. You can't have 2 values of x in this case. All right. But I will, yes, you have solved it in the same way. I think there's a misconception there which was created in a sense that you did not correctly apply the additive inverse. And I'll show it to you as we carry on.
Okay,
just
sir.
focus on the problem. I will do it for you. Before I can solve it, let me see, is there any other person? Okay, Unkabetsi, I see your hand is still up, or did you forget to put it down? Unkabetsi, I see your hand is still up.
Down.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to solve it. Let's solve it for the benefit of every learner in the classroom. The most important thing, I'm sure, Unkabetsi, you can see the misconception that I'm speaking about. If you say x is 2, then your left-hand side will be 2 times 2 is 4, 4 plus 3 is 7. Do you agree?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and let's go to the right-hand side. So the right-hand side will be 5 times 2. What is 5 times 2?
10.
10. And what is 10 plus 3?
13.
13. Now you have 7 in the left-hand side, you have 13 in the right-hand side. Can you see that the left-hand side is not equal to the right-hand side? What does that tell you? it tells you that X value is not correct. All right. So it's very important to test it. But let's go now. Let me show you the best way or the best method which you can use to find this value. Now look at what we have there. We have 2x plus 3 is equal to 5x plus 3. Now, what I've applied here is what I've taught you in the beginning of the lesson. I have applied what we call the additive inverse. Excuse me. I've applied the additive inverse. What does this mean? It means that I'm now transposing the 3. What is happening here is that I've taken the positive 3. Can you see positive 3 in the left-hand side? And then I'm taking it to the right-hand side, and then it will change the sign. The additive inverse of positive 3 is negative 3. So when you take it here, this 3 here, it was already, is the same one as the 3 on the right-hand side. So you leave it as it is, and then you bring the 3 on the left-hand side to the right-hand side. It will now change the sign. It will be negative. So in other words, the right-hand side will be 3 minus 3. Now what happened to the 5x, which we had here in the right-hand side? I've also transposed that to the left-hand side. And because it was positive, if you transpose it to the left-hand side, it will be negative. So once you cross the bridge, which is the equal sign there, once you go to the other side, you definitely have to change the sign. All right. And then, of course, 2x minus 5x gives us negative 3x, and 3 minus 3 is 0. So obviously, if you use now the multiplicative inverse of negative 3, which is negative third, you divide both sides. If you divide 0 by 3, you still get 0. So 0 divided by any number. If you divide 0 by any number, you get 0. So meaning that your x value there will be 0. And if you want to test it, Nosipo, and of course this goes to Yoliswa and the rest of the class, if you want to test whether your answer is correct or not, you can take your final answer and test it in the equation. Let's test it now. X is 0, then it means 2 times 0 is 0 in the left-hand side there. And 0 plus 3 gives you 3. So the left-hand side, you now have 3. Let's test it in the right-hand side. The right-hand side is 5x plus 3. So x is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. And 0 plus 3 is 3. So you can see now that the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side, meaning that the value of x is correct. So x is equal to 0. That is your answer there. That is the answer. I'm not sure if there's any question. I saw Nosipo's hand was up. Right, we are now proceeding to the next one. Which
I want the second one.
Okay, sure. Please go ahead.
So x plus 3 equals to 9 minus 3, right? Second, oh my God.
Okay, please go ahead.
So now I grouped the like terms together, and it came out as 5x plus x equals to 9 minus 3.
Exactly. That's correct.
And then, yes, and then 5x plus x equals to 6x.
Okay.
And then 6x, okay. 5x plus x is equal to 6x, and then 9 minus 3 is equal to 6. So the equation is 6x equals to 6, right?
Exactly.
Yes,
6x
then,
equal to 6.
yes, and then now I did the division, which was 6x divided by 6. We cancel the 6 and I got the x on the left hand side, and then on the right hand side it's 6 divided by 6, and it gave me 1. And I checked it, sir, it is okay.
So the value of x is 1.
Yes, sir.
Definitely. Thank you very much indeed. That is the correct approach. That is the correct approach. So yes, Nosipo is correct. What we do, the first things first, the equation is 5x plus 3 is equal to 9 minus x. And of course, if you transpose, you can just transpose your numbers there by using the principle of the additive inverse. Now, how it works, the positive 3 on the left-hand side becomes negative on the right-hand side. So you can see.
So can I continue with the 2x plus 3? Or should I give you a chance?
All right, I'll give you a chance just now. Let me just finalize everything for the sake of the learners. Right, the last one, the second one, in fact, is done by Nosipo. You transpose the 3 from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. And of course, this becomes now negative 3. And if you have managed to check, you'll see that the negative x on the right-hand side is now positive x on the left-hand side. So we are in actual fact grouping the like terms. You'll remember the lesson that we once had on equations, that it is very important when you work with algebraic equations or algebraic expressions rather, to group the like terms together. So we have done the algebraic expressions before and we have grouped the like terms. So 5x plus x becomes 6x and 9 minus 3 is 6. And of course, just as Nosipo said, from this point, you can just divide both sides by 6. And 6x now, if you divide that by 6, you will be left with x, and then 6 divided by 6 is 1. So the value of x is 1. And sure, you can test, and once you test it, you'll be able to see that it will give you the correct answer, because the left-hand side, 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 plus 3 is 8. So the left-hand side, you left 8, whereas the right-hand side, 9 minus 1 is also 8. So the left-hand side and the right-hand side are equal. What does this mean? This means that our answer is correct. So without any waste of time, I'm just going to go back to the third one, which is 2x plus 3 is equal to x plus 4. And I just want to see if there are any hands. Let's see how many participants' hands are. All right, I still see it's only one participant. And this is a cause for concern, because I want all of us to engage with the question and to speak on these questions. Right, let me hold you right there, Nosipo, for a while, and let's try to go now to Kamohelo. Kamohelo, I hope that you can hear me. I'm just coming to you, even though your hand is not up. I want to test your understanding on today's lesson. We are now at 1.3. 2x plus 3 is equal to x plus 4, and we are solving for x. Not just Kamohelo, but anyone is free to raise a hand and speak on the same subject. Right, we still have Nosipo. We don't have any other person. I'll have no choice but to unmute you, Nosipo, just to carry on once again.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Nosipo.
So the equation is 2x plus 3 equals to x plus 4. So I took the like terms again, and it gave me a 2x minus x equals to negative, okay, so I said negative 3 plus 4 is defined.
Okay, so 2x minus x, you got x, and then what happened to the 3?
Negative, I took the 3, sir, because it was a positive and I made it, since it went to the other side, I made it a negative. So is it fine because it's negative 3 plus 4.
Okay, which is? The answer is?
It's 1, sir.
Thank
But
you
when
very
I
much.
checked, yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Nosipo. The answer there will be 1. And of course, as Nosipo has just said, you can tell that in this equation, 2x plus 3 is equal to x plus 4. So what is important here is just to realize the importance of using the additive inverse. And remember, ask yourself a question: what is the additive inverse of positive 3? So the additive inverse of positive 3 will be negative 3. So in other words, you'll have negative 3 now in the right-hand side. And what is the additive inverse of positive x? The additive inverse of positive x is negative x. So now in the left-hand side, once you group the like terms, 2x minus x becomes x, and 4 minus 3 becomes 1. So definitely, as Nosipo said, x, or the value of x, is equal to 1. And if you want to test it, you can always go back to your equation and put, for every value of x there, you just put 1 there. So we substitute. In mathematics, we say that is the substitute. You substitute x by its value, which is now 1. And 2 times 1 gives you 2, and 2 plus 3 is 5. And the left-hand side is now 5. The right-hand side will be 1 plus 4, which is also 5. So the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. So the two are equal. We want to thank you, Nosipo, for taking the time and the trouble to answer this question. As we now proceed to give Unkabetse a chance, we are now going to go to Unkabetse and give Unkabetse a chance to proceed to answer the next one. Unkabetse, we are now at the fourth one, which is the last activity. 10x minus 7 is equal to 5x plus 3. Please go ahead. Unkabetse, please proceed.
Okay.
All right, we seem to have lost Unkabetse. Oh, you are there. Okay, fine. Thank you, Unkabetse.
I say 10x minus 5x is 5x, which is equal to positive 7 plus 3 is equal to 10. So my answer is 1.
Okay. So your answer is 1.
Yes, sir.
All right. I like the method that we have used. I'm just a little bit worried about your answer, but I think the method was correct because you've taken now a negative 7 to the right-hand side, and you told me that that is 3 plus 7, which is 10. And secondly, you correctly transposed a negative 5x to the left-hand side,
No,
and that
sir,
is
the answer is 2. The
yes.
answer is 2.
Yes, I'm glad that you have seen the misconception there. You have corrected the mistake. I'm happy. So the answer will be 2. So yes, that is the correct way of doing things. And of course, that was the last one there. 10x minus 7 is equal to 5x plus 3. And all that you needed to do really was to transpose negative 7 from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. This is what we call the additive inverse. So the additive inverse of -7 is +7. So that is why you have +7 in the right-hand side. Now, the additive inverse of +5x will be -5x. And of course, the left-hand side, you have 10x minus 5x. And 10x minus 5x is 5x. And then 3 plus 7 is 10. So from here, you can now use what we call the multiplicative inverse of 5, which is a fifth, 1/5. So you divide both sides by 5. The left-hand side becomes x. If you divide 10 by 5, you get 2. So to test whether your answer is correct, you can just go back to your equation, and where there is x, you now put 2. So 10 times 2 is 20, and 20 minus 7 is 13. So the left-hand side will be 13, and the right-hand side, 5 times 2 is 10, and 10 plus 3 is also 13. So you can tell now that the left-hand side is equal to the right-hand side. So this means that our answer is correct. So this actually brings us to the end of our lesson today. For your homework, I just want you to solve the following equations, A up to E. If you can just look at those equations, please go ahead and do them as homework. We can look at them tomorrow. And of course, this lesson is brought to you by Africa Teen Geeks, the STEM Digital School, in partnership with Sasol Foundation. Until we meet again tomorrow, thank you very much indeed.